Welcome to St. Croix Church, the 9th installment on the book of James. Today looking at James chapter 4, verses 11 to 17, and it seems like there's two separate paragraphs. I think they're both related, and I'll explain how after I read them. The first one seems as though it's on speech. Starting at verse 11, "Do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. Whoever speaks evil against another or judges another speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. So who then are you to judge your neighbor?" And the second paragraph has to do with the future. "Come now, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a town and spend a year there, doing business and making money.' Yet you do not even know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, 'If the Lord wishes, we will live and do this or that.' As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Anyone then who knows the right thing to do and fails to do it commits sin." I think that the thing that connects these passages is that they're both really about humility. That seems to be the context of what we're talking about in this part of the letter. Last week in chapter 4, in the first half, we ended with "Humble yourselves before God." And if this letter had been written to individuals, you might interpret it as come to God with a very humble posture. But every week I've been speaking about the letter as though it was really written to a community, to try to encourage the community to work together, to stay together. And so I wondered if perhaps that might be interpreted a different way. Humble yourselves before God might actually be yield to your brothers and your sisters and try to build together instead of pulling apart. And there's an analogy for that. In the book of Revelation, there's a letter to one of the churches, and this comment is made: "You've lost your first love." And I remember that when I was first interested in Christianity a lot of years ago, I read that and I thought, oh no, I'm not as excited about my faith as I was in the beginning, and I'm not telling people as often as I used to that I'm a Christian now. And then I read the Apostolic Fathers collection, some of the writings of the early church that comes right after the New Testament, and I saw that the earliest Christians read this passage a different way. To have lost your first love was to not be inviting people into your homes as often as you used to. They saw it in more of a horizontal way, not a vertical way. And so I think that's a good analogy for what might be happening in humble yourselves before God. If you look at it in the one sense, if you look at it as a message to an individual, it's vertical. But if you look at it as a message to a community, it's more horizontal. And that's how I'm imagining it this time. Okay, so I think that the second part of today's passage is quite understandable. Don't say we're going to go and do this in this town or that town, we're going to create this. That all involves, a sense of being master of your own destiny in a way that you aren't. You really don't know what's going to happen next. So you shouldn't be arrogant. You should have a sense of open-handedness regarding the future. Okay, that part's quite understandable. The other part, I want to focus on that. "Don't speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. Whoever speaks evil against another or judges another speaks evil against the law and judges the law." Okay, what's that all about? Well, and why are we going back to speech? Because there was a big section about speech in chapter 3. Maybe it's because it's the real focus of the letter. Instead of building people up, using words to make people feel that they belong, the quarreling that's been mentioned is ripping the community apart. It's so easy to do. I definitely believe that there are times when you have to stand up for things that you believe in, and even at the cost of unity. But the focus on this letter is to try to push us, to try to encourage us to build together, to build the beautiful thing that God can be active in the midst of. So today's section, it's it's be careful of your speech. If you accuse others and if you judge them, you're breaking God's law, particularly the royal law of love that was mentioned in chapter 2. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so it made me think that we can use our speech in a way that, even when we're saying something that we believe is right, in a way that pushes others, in a way that divides community, in a way that breaks it. And so I thought about that in regards to some of the things that we've seen in the last week. We've been in the midst of social isolation, been in the midst of a pandemic now for several months, and in this last week, we've seen an eruption of protesting because of police brutality and systemic racism, violent oppression of blacks in particular, or people of color in the United States. And as a Canadian, I think most Canadians will have to admit that we know that we're not exempt from racism either. And we can't wait for the time in history when this is behind us. When white supremacy or any group that feels better than another has lost its sense that it's superior in any way, where we're all judged, as Martin Luther King said, by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin. So this has been a week that's been filled with so many messages, and I've been blown away by message after message, so many of them insightful, thoughtful, but every once in a while a message comes that even though I agree with the content, the tone of it pushes me away. And I've wondered, if this is what the author of James is trying to get at. Is it possible that we create more division by saying things in a particular way, even though the thing that we're saying may be so valuable and so good, but if you say it with a particular kind of a stance, it's almost as though you're the one who knows, and it feels like arrogance once more. So that's the thing that I think James is trying to get at in this chapter. He's focusing on humility in different aspects of life, because really it's the thing that's going to hold us together. We need good speech, we need wisdom, and we really need humility. So this reminded me of a passage that I read in Ronald Rolheiser, and I kept it years ago. Ronald Rolheiser is a Roman Catholic writer, Canadian, and I thought that he had something very interesting to say in this extensive quote, so I'll read parts of it. It's called Following Jesus According to the Letter or the Spirit. I work and move within church circles, and I find that most of the people I meet there are honest, committed, and for the most part radiate their faith positively. Most churchgoers aren't hypocrites. What I do find disturbing within church circles, though, is that too many of us can be bitter, angry, mean-spirited, and judgmental, especially in terms of the very values that we hold most dear. It was Henry Nouwen who first highlighted this, commenting with sadness that many of the really angry, bitter, and ideologically driven people he knew he had met inside of church circles and places of ministry. Within church circles, it sometimes seems everyone is angry about something. Moreover, within church circles, it's all too easy to rationalize our anger in the name of prophecy as a healthy passion for truth and morals. The logic works this way. Because I am sincerely concerned about an important moral or ecclesial or justice issue, I can excuse a certain amount of neurosis, anger, elitism, and negative judgment because I can rationalize that my cause, dogmatic or moral, is so important that it justifies my mean spirit. I need to be this angry and harsh because this is such an important truth. And so we justify our anger by giving it a prophetic cloak, believing that we are warriors for God, truth, and morals, when in fact, we're mostly just struggling with our own wounds, insecurities, and fears. Hence, we often look at others, even whole churches made up of sincere people, trying to live what they believe, and instead of speaking of them well, we speak of them in a disparaging way. I'm kind of paraphrasing here. And we're not looking at what this kind of judgment is saying about us, about our own health of soul and our own following of Jesus. And then he says, don't get me wrong, I know that a lot of things are really important. A lot of messages are very important and must be said. But that truth doesn't trump everything else or give us an excuse to rationalize our anger. We must defend truth, defend those who can't defend themselves, and be solid in the traditions of our own churches. But right truth and right morals don't necessarily make us disciples of Jesus. What does? And then he suggests that it's living within the Spirit of God, not without. And he appeals to Galatians chapter 5. And so he says that we live according to the spirit of the flesh when we live in anger, bitterness, judgment of our neighbor, factionalism, and non-forgiveness. When those things characterize our lives, we shouldn't delude ourselves and think that we're living inside of the Holy Spirit. Conversely, we live inside of the Holy Spirit when our lives are characterized by charity, by joy, peace, patience, goodness, long-suffering, constancy, faith, gentleness, and chastity. If these don't characterize our lives, we shouldn't nurse the illusion that we're inside of God's Spirit, irrespective of our passion for truth, dogma, or justice. And then at the end of this passage, he says, we need, I believe, to be more self-critical in regards to our anger, harsh judgments, mean spirit, exclusiveness, and disdain for others. As T.S. Eliot once said, the last temptation that's the greatest treason is to do the right thing for the wrong reason. We may have truth and right morals on our side, but our anger and harsh judgments toward those who don't share our truth and morals may well have us standing outside the Father's house, like the older brother of the prodigal son, bitter both at God's mercy and at those who are receiving that mercy. So I think Rolheiser has produced a beautiful piece of writing here, and it's quite insightful. And I think it goes along with what James is saying. And perhaps it's a really relevant word for today. The kinds of messaging that we do, we need to say the things that we believe in. We need to say these important messages, but the way that we say them is also very important. And if we say them in a destructive way, certainly they won't convince the people that disagree with us. They'll just be hardened in whatever position they're in. But they also won't help the people that agree, because it will create more factionalism and more of a sense, it will destroy the sense of belonging. And so I think it's a really important message. James is longing to see humility through and through the whole body. He wants good speech that creates belonging in others. He wants wisdom, and he wants humility in all of life. So that's the message for today. Okay, take care.